Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I watched a dark web stream of a secret Illuminati party. The guests included Putin, Trump, and an alien in a suit. Alright, so I've never been the type of person to post on Reddit, but after what I just went through, I feel like I need to share this. Maybe it'll help me process it. Maybe it'll warn someone else. I don't know. What I do know is that I'm done with the internet, at least the dark web part of it. I swear I wasn't trying to find anything illegal or crazy. I mean, yeah, I'm a little curious about that stuff. Aren't we all? But mostly, I just wanted to see if the stories were real. You know, like those threads where people claim they've seen hitman services or human experiments. I figured it was mostly exaggeration, clickbait, or maybe just fake screenshots. But after this, I'll never doubt those stories again. It all started about a week ago. I was bored out of my mind after work and scrolling through TikTok. You know how it is. 1 minute you're watching a funny cat video, and the next, some edgy dude pops up talking about his craziest dark web experience. He was hyping it up like it was the scariest thing ever, but he didn't actually show anything, just hinted at stuff. Honestly, I thought he was full of it, but something about the way he described it made me curious. He said something like, "If you know where to look, you can find streams of stuff you'd never imagine. Secret government meetings, cult rituals, even parties." I should have scrolled past, but nope. I started Googling. At first, I couldn't find much, but then I came across a Reddit thread with step-by-step instructions on how to access the dark web. It seemed harmless enough. Just a bunch of tech-savvy nerds geeking out about Tor browsers and onion links. So I downloaded the software, thinking I'd just explore a bit, and then delete it. Like a little internet adventure, right? At first, it was kind of underwhelming. Most of the sites were either dead links or boring forums. A lot of sketchy marketplaces, sure, but nothing too wild. I was just about to call it a night when I stumbled across this weird forum called The Velvet Curtain. The name was cheesy, but the description caught my eye. Where the elite meet. Exclusive live streams for discerning audiences. It felt like one of those scammy clickbait ads, but I clicked on it anyway. I had to create an account, which was weird, but I used a fake name and email. Once I got in, the homepage was like some luxury nightclub vibe. Dark colors, gold fonts, fancy logos. Most of the posts were cryptic, like, "The show begins at midnight. Dress appropriately," or "Masks mandatory." I thought it was all role-playing or some ARG alternate reality game, but then I saw a pinned thread titled "Invitation Only, RSVP below." I don't know what possessed me to click on it, but I did. The thread had a countdown timer, exactly 48 hours until the event. Below it was a link, which led to a live stream page. It asked for a password. Obviously, I didn't have it, but there was a comment that said, "For first-timers, check your messages. Consider this a one-time courtesy." Sure enough, I had a message in my inbox. It was just a single word. Obsidian. No explanation, no context. I typed it into the password field, and the page loaded instantly. The screen was blank except for the words, "Stream goes live in 1 day, 23 hours, 59 minutes. At that point, I was half expecting it to be a scam or some weird art project, but I was curious enough to set a reminder on my phone. I figured, worst case, it'd be some lame indie film. Best case, I'd have a creepy story to tell my friends. Either way, no harm done, right? The next day, I went about my life like normal. Work was boring as usual, and I ended up at a Starbucks on my lunch break, scrolling through Instagram. For some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about that countdown. It's like it was stuck in my brain, just ticking away. Part of me wanted to back out, delete everything, and pretend I'd never found the site. But the other part of me, the curious part, it wanted to see what was behind that velvet curtain. When midnight rolled around, I was sitting in my apartment with all the lights off, laptop open and headphones on. I logged back into the site, entered the password, and waited. The screen was black at first, but then a message popped up. "Welcome, esteemed guest. The stream will begin shortly. Please remain silent and do not engage in chat unless instructed." There was a chat box on the side, but it was disabled for now. A few usernames were already listed, stuff like Black Cobra and Venetian Mask. Nothing too weird, but the vibes were definitely off. It felt wrong. Like I shouldn't be there. Before we start with today's video, if you are new, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. And for everyone who follows so far, write me down in the comment tittle ideas as next story time I should make. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. There was this eerie classical music playing in the background, like something out of Eyes Wide Shut. People were walking around, all dressed in fancy suits and gowns, but every single one of them was wearing a mask. Not the kind we're used to these days, but those creepy, ornate masquerade masks. Some of them were animals, foxes, owls, wolves. Others were just blank faces, completely smooth and featureless. At first, I thought it was just a high-end costume party. Weird, sure, but not terrifying. But then, the camera zoomed in on the stage at the front of the room. There were 3 chairs set up, like thrones, and 3 people sitting in them. The first one, I swear to God, it was Vladimir Putin. He was wearing this dark red mask that only covered half his face, but there was no mistaking him. The second person, Donald freaking Trump. He had on a gold mask that looked like a lion, and he was sipping something out of a champagne flute, grinning like this was the best night of his life. But the third person, that's when I realized I was in way over my head. It wasn't a person at all. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. Tall, thin, gray skin, huge black eyes. An alien. It was wearing a suit, like a custom-tailored Armani suit, but its face was completely uncovered. It wasn't even trying to hide what it was. And the craziest part? No one else seemed fazed by it. They were all just mingling, laughing, sipping their drinks like this was totally normal. At this point, my heart was racing. I thought about closing the tab, shutting my laptop, and pretending I'd never seen any of this. But I couldn't move. It was like I was frozen, staring at the screen, waiting to see what would happen next. And that's when the lights dimmed, and a man in a black robe stepped onto the stage. He wasn't wearing a mask, but his face was shadowed by the hood. He held up a microphone and said, in this deep, gravelly voice, "Welcome, honored guests. Tonight, we celebrate the convergence of power, wealth, and knowledge. Let the games begin." All right, let's pick up where I left off. I don't know why I'm doing this. Maybe to get it out of my head. Maybe because I need someone, anyone, to believe me. But fair warning, this is where things start getting really, really messed up. Like the kind of thing that makes you wish you'd never been born curious enough to find it. So, the guy in the robe, the one who said, "Let the games begin," he didn't leave the stage. He just stood there, silent, while the crowd clapped politely. You know, the kind of clap you'd hear at an opera or something. Then, out of nowhere, 2 more people came out onto the stage. Both of them were in suits, like bodyguards, and they were dragging someone between them. A man, mid-30s maybe, in a torn-up shirt and jeans. He wasn't wearing a mask. His face was pale, sweaty, and terrified, like he already knew what was going to happen to him. The man in the robe turned to the audience and said, "Our first course of the evening, a thief among kings." The crowd laughed. Not the kind of laugh you hear when someone cracks a joke, but this cold, detached kind of laughter, like they were watching a reality show and didn't care about the people involved. The man being dragged started screaming. Not words, just raw, guttural screams. He thrashed around, but the bodyguards didn't even flinch. They forced him to his knees in the middle of the stage, right in front of the 3 thrones. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. I wanted to look away, close the laptop, do anything but watch. But it was like I was in a trance. My fingers were gripping the edge of the desk so hard they hurt. The guy in the robe raised his hand, and the screaming stopped. Not because the man calmed down, but because one of the bodyguards shoved something into his mouth. A gag, or a bit, or something. It didn't matter. The sound of him struggling was just as bad. The robed man stepped forward and said, "You have stolen from the sacred circle, and now you will serve as tribute. Let this be a reminder to all who dare to cross us." And then, out of nowhere, this giant table was wheeled onto the stage. I know it sounds weird to say, but it looked medieval, like solid wood, way too heavy for the 2 people pushing it, but they managed. It was covered in this pristine white tablecloth, but the shape underneath it wasn't flat. It was lumpy, uneven, like there were things under it. The robed man pulled the cloth away, and I swear to God, I almost threw up right there. The table was covered in raw meat, bloody, glistening slabs of it, piled up like some kind of butcher's display. But it wasn't cow or pig. It was human. I could see hands, feet, a ribcage, and the head. There was a head sitting right in the middle, staring up at the ceiling with blank, cloudy eyes. Its skin was pale, bluish, like it had been drained of blood. The chat box on the side of the stream lit up for the first time. People were posting things like, "Beautiful presentation," or "A fine selection tonight." One user, Venetian Mask, even wrote, "I wonder how the chef prepared the liver this time." Like it was some kind of twisted cooking show. The robed man motioned to the bodyguards, and they lifted the screaming man onto the table. He was thrashing so hard, they had to tie him down with thick leather straps. His face was pressed sideways against the bloody wood, his eyes wide, tears streaming down his cheeks. I couldn't hear anything he was saying through the gag, but I didn't need to. His body said it all. He was begging, pleading for his life. And the crowd? They just watched, calm, smiling. Some of them were sipping champagne, like this was no big deal. That's when the robed man pulled out the knife. It wasn't just any knife either. It was long and thin, more like a ceremonial blade than something you'd use in a kitchen. The handle was black, carved with intricate symbols that glinted under the stage lights. He held it up for everyone to see, and the crowd erupted into applause. Actual applause, like they were thrilled this was happening. He turned back to the man on the table and leaned in close, whispering something in his ear. I couldn't hear what he said, but whatever it was made the man thrash even harder, his muffled screams turning into full-blown panic. The robed man just smiled, straightened up, and brought the knife down. I won't go into too much detail here. I don't think I can without losing my mind. But let's just say the knife wasn't used for anything quick or merciful. It wasn't a killing blow. The robed man took his time, carving into the man's arm first, peeling back the skin like he was unwrapping a Christmas present. The crowd loved it. The chat box exploded with comments like, "Exquisite technique," and "What a showman." I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like there was a weight pressing down on it. I don't know why I didn't close the stream. I think I was in shock. Or maybe it was the morbid curiosity, that tiny part of my brain that wanted to see how far this would go. It went too far. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the man on the table stopped moving. His body was limp, lifeless, a bloody mess of torn flesh and exposed bone. The robed man wiped the knife on the tablecloth like it was nothing, then turned to the audience and bowed. The room erupted into cheers, and the chat filled with messages like, "A fine performance. Tonight's tribute was well deserved. Let's hope the next one is as entertaining." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a regular event. These people, whoever they were, did this all the time, and they loved it. But the worst part, the thing that still makes me wake up in a cold sweat at night, the robed man looked directly at the camera, at me. He held up his hand and said, "To our guests watching from afar, we thank you for joining us. Remember, the curtain only opens for those who deserve to see." And then the screen went black, just like that. No warning, no countdown, nothing. The stream was over. I stared at my laptop, shaking for what felt like an eternity. My brain was screaming at me to shut it down, to delete everything, to burn my hard drive if I had to. But before I could move, a notification popped up on the site. "Thank you for attending. Your presence has been noted." I slammed the laptop shut and ran to the bathroom. I barely made it to the sink before throwing up. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the faucet on to rinse my mouth. That was 2 days ago. Since then, I've been paranoid as hell. I keep thinking I see people watching me, out of the corner of my eye, through my apartment window, even when I'm driving. And last night, I found a note slipped under my door. It just said 3 words. "The curtain calls." I don't know what to do. I don't know who to tell, but I feel like I'm being watched, and I have this sinking feeling that this thing, this velvet curtain, isn't done with me yet. You'd think, after seeing something like that, I'd have enough sense to call the cops, right? Or, at the very least, smash my laptop and move to a new city. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something about that message, "Your presence has been noted," kept playing over and over in my head like a broken record. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. And if these people, or whoever the hell they were, had the power to put on a show like that, I didn't think the police would be much help. I thought maybe if I just ignored it, if I didn't log back on or talk to anyone about it, it would all go away. Wishful thinking. The note under my door pretty much destroyed any hope I had of that. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up with every light in my apartment turned on, clutching a baseball bat I hadn't touched since high school. Every little noise, pipes creaking, cars passing outside, even the hum of the fridge, sent my heart racing. I kept checking the locks on my door and windows, over and over, until my fingers were raw from gripping the bat so tight. When the sun finally came up, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the note was just some sick prank. Maybe someone in my building saw me acting weird and decided to mess with me. I wanted to believe that so badly, but deep down, I knew better. Around noon, I forced myself to leave the apartment. I figured being around people would help calm me down, make me feel less hunted. So I walked to the nearest Starbucks. It was crowded, thankfully, and I managed to snag a seat near the window where I could see everything outside. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through Twitter, trying to distract myself. That's when I noticed something strange. My feed was full of random accounts posting about secret gatherings and hidden truths. Stuff like, "The curtain hides what you aren't ready to see," and "Masks reveal more than they hide." It wasn't just one or two posts either. There were dozens of them, all cryptic, all eerily similar to what I'd seen on the site. I clicked on one of the accounts, but it didn't have any followers or posts, just a single profile picture. A black mask with gold trim, the same mask I'd seen one of the guests wearing in the stream. My hand started shaking again, and I almost dropped my phone. It was like they were taunting me, letting me know they were still watching. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message. No number, just a blank sender field and a single line of text. "Look behind you." I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Slowly, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone in a mask or a black robe. Maybe the guy from the stage with that knife in his hand. But there was nothing. Just a bunch of people sipping lattes and tapping away on their laptops. Normal. Safe. But then I noticed him. He was sitting at the table directly behind me, dressed in a plain black hoodie and jeans, staring down at his phone. At first, I thought he was just another customer, but then I realized he wasn't drinking anything. No coffee, no water, nothing. Just sitting there, scrolling like he was trying to blend in. Except he wasn't scrolling. His phone screen was off. I grabbed my stuff and bolted. I didn't even bother throwing my cup in the trash. I just ran out of the Starbucks and didn't stop until I was halfway down the block. When I finally looked back, he was standing just outside the door, staring at me. He wasn't following, not yet, but he didn't need to. He just stood there, watching, like he wanted me to know he could catch up whenever he felt like it. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and went straight to my computer. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted answers. I opened my browser and tried to log back into the Velvet Curtain, but the site was gone. The link didn't work, and even the forum where I'd found it originally had been wiped. It was like it had never existed. I thought about going on Reddit, posting about what had happened, but what would I even say? "Hey guys, I saw a live stream of a guy being butchered on a table, and now I think I'm being stalked by a cult." Yeah, that'd go over well. People would call me a liar, or tell me I was crazy. And maybe I was. God, I wanted to be crazy. That night I tried to sleep. I really did. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that table. The man tied down, screaming, the knife slicing into his arm, the alien in the suit, sitting there like it was just another day at the office. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of my phone buzzing, over and over, like someone was calling me non-stop. When I picked it up, there were no missed calls, just a notification from an unknown number. Delivery at your door. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay in bed, pretend I didn't see the message, wait until morning. But something pulled me towards the door anyway. Call it curiosity, call it stupidity, whatever. I grabbed the bat, unlocked the door, and cracked it open just enough to see outside. There was a package on the floor. Plain brown cardboard, no markings, no address, nothing. I poked it with the bat, half expecting it to explode or something, but it didn't. It just sat there, silent, harmless looking. I don't know why I brought it inside. I should have left it out there, called the cops, anything but open it. But I did. And when I saw what was inside, I wished I hadn't. It was a mask, black with gold trim, just like the ones from the stream. And underneath it, wrapped in plastic, was a photograph. It was a picture of me, sitting at the Starbucks earlier that day, staring down at my phone. The last thing in the box was a piece of paper, folded neatly into thirds. I unfolded it with shaking hands, and all it said was this: "We know you watched. Now you must join." I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days after the package showed up. I couldn't. Every time I even thought about stepping outside, I felt like someone was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. The paranoia was eating me alive. I barely ate, barely slept. I just sat there, staring at the mask on the floor, like it might come alive and strangle me in my sleep. I should have thrown it away, burned it, smashed it, anything to get it out of my sight. But every time I reached for it, I hesitated. It was like touching it would make everything real, more real than it already was. So I left it there, in the middle of the room, like some kind of cursed relic. On the 4th day, the knocking started. It was around midnight, and I was sitting on the couch with the TV on, trying to drown out my thoughts. At first, I thought it was coming from the apartment upstairs, just someone moving furniture or dropping something heavy. But then it happened again, and again, a slow, deliberate knock, like someone was testing the strength of the door. I froze. My first instinct was to grab the bat, but then I remembered the package. Delivery at your door. What if it was them? What if they'd come to finish what they started? The knocking didn't stop. It got louder, more insistent. Whoever it was, they weren't going away. I crept toward the door, holding my breath, and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode. I stared at the empty hallway, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the knocking stopped, just like that. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just silence. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. I packed a bag with whatever I could carry, clothes, some cash, my laptop, and left. I didn't have a plan, just a vague idea that I'd check into a motel somewhere far away and try to figure things out. Maybe disappear completely. It wasn't like I had anyone who'd miss me. As I was leaving, I made the mistake of looking down at the mosque one last time. I don't know what I was expecting. To feel closure, maybe, or relief. But all I felt was dread. The kind of dread that settles deep in your gut and makes you want to crawl out of your own skin. I grabbed it. I don't even know why, but I couldn't leave it behind. Maybe I thought if I took it with me, they'd stop coming to my apartment. Maybe I thought it would give me answers. Either way, I stuffed it into my bag and got the hell out of there. I ended up driving for hours, aimlessly, just trying to put as much distance between me and that apartment as possible. The further I got, the safer I felt. By the time I checked into a cheap motel off the highway, I almost believed I'd escaped. Almost. That night, I made the mistake of opening my laptop. The first thing I saw when I logged in was an email. No subject line, no sender, just a single attachment, a video file. I should have deleted it. I should have closed the laptop and thrown it out the window, but I didn't. I opened it. The video started with a static-filled screen, like an old VHS tape. Then it cut to a room. My room. The one I'd just left. The camera was shaky, like whoever was holding it was trying to be discreet. It panned across the living room, past the couch, and stopped on the mask. My mask. The one I thought I'd taken with me. It was still on the floor, right where I'd left it. But something was different. The air in the room looked wrong, warped, like heat waves rising off asphalt. And then the camera zoomed in, close enough to see the texture of the mask, the way the light caught on its gold trim. And then it moved. Not a lot. Just a tiny twitch, like it was breathing, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The camera pulled back, and for a second, I thought the video was over, but then the person holding it turned it toward themselves. It was me. Not just someone who looked like me. It was me. Same face, same clothes, same everything, except their eyes. My eyes. They weren't normal. They were black, pitch black, like they'd been hollowed out and filled with ink. My doppelganger stared into the camera for what felt like an eternity before they smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was too wide, too sharp, like their mouth had been split open by a knife. And then they spoke. "You can't run." The video ended. I slammed the laptop shut and backed away, my whole body shaking. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, but eventually I noticed something. The bag I'd brought with me. It was open, and the mask was gone. I searched the entire motel room, tearing through drawers, flipping over the bed, but it wasn't there. I tried telling myself I'd left it behind after all, that it had never been in the bag to begin with, but deep down, I knew better. The knocking started again. This time, it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the window. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see whatever was out there, but I couldn't help myself. I turned slowly and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. There was no one there, just the empty parking lot, dimly lit by a flickering street lamp. But then I noticed something on the ground just outside the window. It was another package. I don't know what I expected to find when I opened it. More photographs, another note, but what I found was worse, so much worse. It was a hand, a severed human hand, pale and bloodless, with the fingers bent into a strange, unnatural position. The skin was ice cold to the touch, and there was a piece of paper pinned to the palm with a rusty nail. The paper had a single word scrawled on it, in black ink. Soon. I dropped the hand and stumbled back, my stomach lurching. I wanted to scream, to call someone, anyone, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. They knew where I was. They'd known all along. And then my phone buzzed. Another text. No number. Just one line. Time to put on the mask. That was the moment I realized there was no escape. No matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to hide, they'd find me. They always would, because the curtain wasn't just opening for me, it was swallowing me whole. I didn't leave the motel after finding the hand. Where was I supposed to go? They had me pinned down, cornered like a rat in a cage. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, to flee, but my mind kept circling back to the same sickening truth. There was no point. Wherever I went, they'd be waiting. The note said it all. Soon, they were coming, and I couldn't stop it. I spent hours sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching my baseball bat like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The room felt wrong, like the walls were closing in, the air getting heavier. Every sound outside, footsteps, a car door slamming, even the distant hum of the highway, made me flinch. I was spiraling, and I knew it. Then, sometime around 2 a.m., the lights went out. At first, I thought it was a power outage, the kind of thing that happens at run-down motels like this. But when I looked out the window, the street lamp was still flickering, casting long, eerie shadows across the parking lot. The darkness in my room felt deliberate, like it was swallowing the light. And then the TV turned on. Static. Pure, deafening static. The screen flickered, bright and blinding in the pitch-black room. My instinct was to turn it off, but something stopped me. I don't know what. Curiosity, fear, maybe both. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the screen. The static started to shift, forming shapes, patterns. A face emerged. No, not a face. My face. It stared back at me, with those same black, empty eyes I'd seen in the video. Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then slowly, it began to grin. I can't explain the feeling that washed over me in that moment. It wasn't just fear. It was despair. Pure, unrelenting despair. Like every good thing in the world had been ripped away, leaving me hollow. My reflection on the screen tilted its head, still grinning, and then it whispered, "The curtain is open." The TV shut off, plunging the room into darkness again, and that's when I heard it. The door creaking open. I turned around, clutching the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. The door to my motel room was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. I knew I'd locked it. I'd checked it a dozen times, maybe more. But now it was open, and the hallway beyond it was pitch black. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of the wind, soft and steady, carrying a faint, metallic smell. And then I saw it. The mask. It was lying on the floor just outside the door, perfectly positioned in the center of the hallway. Its black and gold trim gleamed faintly, almost glowing in the darkness. It was like it was waiting for me. I stepped forward, my bat raised, ready to swing at anything that moved. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed through the empty hallway, and I spun around, banging on the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. That's when the lights flickered on. The hallway wasn't empty anymore. They were there, all of them. The guests from the stream, still dressed in their elaborate suits and gowns, their masks gleaming under the flickering lights. They stood in perfect silence, lining both sides of the hallway, like an honor guard. I recognized some of them, the fox, the wolf, the featureless faces. My stomach churned as I realized they weren't mannequins. They were breathing, watching. The robed man was standing at the far end of the hallway. His hood was still up, but I could feel his eyes on me, burning into my soul. He raised his hand and beckoned me forward. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of lead. But then the guests started clapping, slow and deliberate, their gloved hands making an eerie, muffled sound. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until it was deafening. I dropped the bat. I don't remember walking down the hallway, but somehow I ended up in a massive room. It wasn't the ballroom from the stream. It was darker, more industrial. The walls were concrete, the floor stained with what I could only hope wasn't blood. There was a single chair in the center of the room, surrounded by cameras mounted on tripods. The lights were blinding, casting harsh shadows that danced across the walls. "Sit," the robed man said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it sent a chill down my spine. I shook my head, backing away, but the guests closed in behind me, their masks inches from my face. I had no choice. I sat. As soon as I did, the robed man stepped forward, holding the mask. My mask. He placed it in my lap, his hands lingering for a moment too long. Then he leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "Wear it," he whispered. I wanted to refuse, to throw the mask as far away as I could, but my hands moved on their own, lifting it to my face. The moment it touched my skin, I felt different, lighter, detached, like my body wasn't mine anymore. The cameras whirred to life, their red lights blinking in unison. The robed man stepped back, spreading his arms like a conductor preparing an orchestra. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing through the room, "our newest guest has arrived. Let the performance begin." The lights dimmed, and the guests began to chant. Low, guttural sounds that didn't form any words I could understand. The air grew thick, heavy, with the scent of decay. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. And then I saw them. They weren't human. Not anymore. Their masks had fused with their faces, twisting their features into grotesque parodies of the animals they represented. The fox had too many teeth, sharp and glistening. The owl's eyes were wide and unblinking, glowing faintly in the darkness. They moved toward me in perfect synchronization, their steps echoing like a drumbeat. The robed man approached, holding the knife. The same knife from the stream, its blade still stained with dried blood. "You wanted to see," he said, his voice almost tender. "And now, you'll be part of the show." I don't remember what happened next. There was pain, blinding and all-consuming, and then nothing. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. The mask was gone, the package was gone, even my bag was gone. It was like none of it had ever happened, but it did. I know it did, because now, every time I look in the mirror, my reflection doesn't match me. It's subtle, just a flicker here, a shadow there, but it's enough. Enough to know I didn't escape. Not really. The curtain isn't closed. It's never closed. And I'm part of the show now. Forever. I found my neighbor on a dark web live stream. The chat said, "They're not human anymore." I'll start this by saying, I wasn't planning on posting this anywhere. Honestly, I'm not sure if I even want to be typing this out now, but I've got this weight sitting on my chest, like if I don't tell someone, it's going to crush me. Maybe posting it here will help me make sense of it, or maybe it'll just make me seem crazy. I don't know. For context, I live in a pretty average suburban neighborhood. You know, the kind of place where the lawns are always mowed. Everyone waves at each other when they pass, and the biggest drama is when someone's dog barks too much. It's nice, but it's boring. Perfect for someone like me who works remotely and doesn't want much trouble. Now there's this house down the street that's been kind of off. Not creepy in a haunted house way, but just weird. It belongs to a guy named Mr. Olson. He's maybe mid-50s, always keeps to himself, and drives this beat-up old Volvo that's so rusty, it looks like it might fall apart if you sneeze near it. Nobody ever sees him much, except when he's getting his mail or dragging his garbage cans to the curb. And even then, he doesn't say much, just gives this stiff nod if you wave at him. Most of us in the neighborhood just kind of ignore him. He wasn't exactly the type to join the block cookout or anything. But last week, something happened that I just can't shake. It started with a package. I was out for a walk one morning when I noticed this delivery guy, a FedEx driver, standing on Olson's porch, knocking over and over again. The guy looked annoyed, like he'd been standing there forever. I figured Olson was probably just ignoring the door, as usual. But when I got closer, I saw the FedEx guy slip something under the doormat instead of taking the package back to the truck. It was a small black envelope. I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, people get weird mail all the time, right? But a few hours later, I saw the same FedEx truck circling the block again. I stood by my window, watching, and sure enough, the driver got out with another envelope, same black color, and dropped it off at Olson's place. This happened 3 more times that day. By then, I couldn't help but feel like something was off. Nobody gets that much mail, let alone weird black envelopes from FedEx, in a single day. I was curious, but it wasn't my business. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I probably wouldn't have thought about it again if it weren't for what happened that night. Around 11:30 p.m., I was scrolling through TikTok when my internet suddenly cut out. This wasn't super unusual. My provider's garbage, and it happens a couple of times a month. But this time, my phone wasn't connecting to data either. Frustrated, I decided to kill some time by looking through my computer files. That's when I remembered a link a friend had sent me a few weeks ago. It was to this forum he called the Dark Web Light. Apparently, it was a gateway to some of the less illegal corners of the deep web, places where you could find conspiracy theories, strange chat rooms, and allegedly live streams. I wasn't sure if I believed half of what he told me, but I'd saved the link because, well, curiosity, I guess. Anyway, with nothing else to do, I opened it. The homepage was simple, like a 2005 era website, just black text on a white background with a bunch of categories to choose from. I clicked on a section labeled Live Feeds. Most of the streams were ridiculous. Stuff like people opening boxes of stolen Amazon packages or blurry footage from inside abandoned malls. But one caught my eye almost immediately. The title was The Experiment, Test Subject Number 42. It was the thumbnail that made my stomach drop. It was my neighbor, Mr. Olson. At first, I told myself it couldn't be him. The stream was grainy, like it was being filmed with an old security camera, but the man strapped to the chair in the center of the frame looked just like him. Same thinning gray hair, same hunched posture. He was slumped over, his arms tied to the chair with what looked like zip ties. Behind him, the room was pitch black except for a single overhead light that cast harsh shadows on his face. The chat was blowing up with comments. Is he still alive? Bet he doesn't last another round. They're not human anymore. That last comment made me pause. I scrolled back up and reread it, my pulse hammering in my ears. Not human anymore. What the hell did that mean? I leaned closer to the screen, trying to figure out if it was really Olson. That's when the camera zoomed in, and I felt my blood turn cold. It wasn't just him. It was his living room. I recognized the ugly floral wallpaper and the lopsided bookshelf behind him. This wasn't some weird prank or a look-alike. This was real. I don't remember how long I sat there, frozen, staring at the screen. Part of me wanted to close the tab and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but another part of me, the stupid, reckless part, couldn't look away. The chat kept scrolling, faster and faster, as the camera stayed locked on Olsen. Then, suddenly, the feed cut out. No warning, no explanation, just a blank screen. For a few seconds, I thought it was over, but then a new message popped up in the chat, in bright red text. Congratulations, viewer number 8. You've been chosen to join the next experiment. At first, I didn't understand, but then I noticed the number in the corner of the screen. 8 viewers. I was one of them. The second that red text flashed on my screen, my heart dropped like a lead weight. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen, my cursor hovering over the X to close the browser. But I didn't click. Something about the words, "You've been chosen," felt heavier than just an internet prank. My brain was trying to rationalize it. Oh, it's just some bot trying to scare you. But my gut knew better. And then my phone buzzed. I grabbed it instinctively, and the second I looked at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It was a text message from an unknown number. The message was short, just 2 words. "Don't move." My stomach flipped. I turned my head toward my front door, half expecting someone to be standing there, watching me. But everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. No cars passing outside, no crickets, no distant hum of TVs from the neighbors' houses. Just silence. And then I noticed the small red light blinking on the corner of my laptop screen. The webcam. I don't use it much. My job doesn't require video calls, but I knew for a fact I hadn't turned it on. I reached over and slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. Someone was watching me. Someone knew I'd clicked on that stream. The text came again, this time in all caps. I said, "Don't move." I couldn't stay in my house. I grabbed my car keys, shoved my feet into a pair of sneakers, and bolted for the door. I didn't even bother locking it behind me. My car was parked at the end of the driveway, and the second I was inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. The first place that came to mind was the Starbucks a few blocks away. It's open 24 hours, and I figured I could sit there, surrounded by people, while I tried to figure out what the hell was going on. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror the whole way, expecting to see someone following me, but the roads were empty. It was almost eerie how alone I felt. When I pulled into the Starbucks parking lot, I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The place was quiet, with only a few cars in the lot. I parked near the entrance, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone. I decided to check the stream again, just to see if it was still up. I opened my browser, my thumb hesitating over the bookmark. Part of me didn't want to know, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, won out. I tapped the link. The page loaded instantly. The stream was back up. This time, the camera angle had changed. It wasn't in Olsen's living room anymore. It was in a basement, a grimy, dimly lit basement with concrete walls and a dirt floor. The chair was still there, but it was empty now. Olsen was gone. Instead, the camera was pointed at something that made my skin crawl. It was another chair, identical to the first, and sitting in it was me. I blinked, shaking my head like I could somehow clear the image from my brain, but it didn't go away. The The person on the screen looked exactly like me. Same hoodie, same messy hair, same nervous twitch I get in my left hand when I'm scared. They were slumped forward, zip ties cutting into their wrists, just like Olsen had been. The chat was alive with comments. Oh shit, it's starting again. New subject. Looks like they upgraded. Bro, is that me? They're already dead. They just don't know it yet. I stared at the screen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It wasn't possible. I was sitting in my car, watching this happen, but the person on the stream was me. And the longer I stared, the more I noticed something was wrong. The figure's skin was pale, not just pale, but almost translucent like wax. Their eyes were slightly off too wide, too empty, and their mouth was moving, whispering something I couldn't hear. I turned the volume up on my phone, but the only sound coming through was a low, droning hum. And then, all at once, the figure on the screen turned their head and looked directly at the camera. At me. My phone buzzed again, snapping me out of my trance. Another text, from the same unknown number. Get out of the car. I nearly dropped the phone. My head snapped up, and that's when I saw it. There was someone standing in the shadows at the edge of the parking lot, tall, thin, their face hidden by a hoodie. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching me. I couldn't see their eyes, but I could feel them. The way you can feel someone staring at you, even if you're not looking at them. I locked eyes with the figure for what felt like forever. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but my body wouldn't move. And then slowly, they raised a hand and pointed at me. My instincts kicked in. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the parking lot. The figure didn't move, just kept pointing, even as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway across town, parked outside an all-night McDonald's. I sat there shaking, trying to piece everything together. Who were they? How did they know I was watching the stream? And what the hell was happening to Olsen? And to me? My phone buzzed one last time. You can't run forever. The experiment has already started. I sat there in the McDonald's parking lot, clutching my phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The last text message, the one that said, "You can't run forever," was still on the screen, the words burning into my mind like they'd been etched there with a branding iron. The air inside the car felt suffocating, so I cracked the window, hoping for some relief. Instead, I got the stench of something foul, something rotten. I gagged and looked around, expecting to see a dumpster or maybe roadkill nearby, but there was nothing, just the soft hum of the McDonald's sign flickering in the night. And then I heard the faint ding of a notification. Not from my phone this time, no. It came from my laptop, still shoved in my bag on the passenger seat. My heart sank. I didn't even need to open it to know what it was. The experiment wasn't done with me yet. Against every instinct screaming at me to throw the laptop out the window, I opened it. The red text was back, but this time, it wasn't just on the Livestream page. It had taken over my desktop. Every single file, every folder, every app, gone. Just a black screen with one sentence in the middle, written in bold, blood-red letters. Do you want to play? There were two options below it, yes and no. I didn't click either. Instead, I slammed the laptop shut again and shoved it into the back seat, like that would somehow make it all go away. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight. I felt like I was about to have a panic attack, but before I could even begin to calm down, my phone buzzed again. Choose wisely. You don't want us to pick for you. I didn't respond. Hell, I didn't even know how to respond. I turned the phone off completely, but even as the screen went dark, I felt like it didn't matter. Whoever, or whatever, was doing this wasn't using anything as simple as phone numbers or IP addresses. They were inside my devices, inside my life, inside my head. I finally worked up the courage to go inside the McDonald's. It was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers nursing cups of coffee in a corner booth, and a tired-looking cashier who barely glanced at me as I ordered a large Coke. I sat in a corner, away from the windows, and pulled out my phone again. Against my better judgment, I turned it back on. No new messages, not yet anyway. I opened my browser and typed in dark web livestream experiment. I figured someone, somewhere, must have encountered this before. But all I found were vague rumors and dead-end threads on forums. The only solid lead was a post buried in a conspiracy subreddit. The title, Rules for Surviving the Experiment. I clicked on it. The post was short, barely 3 paragraphs, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. The rules were written like they came straight out of a horror movie. Once you've been chosen, you cannot escape. Running will only make it worse. Do not ignore their messages. They will find a way to make you respond. The person in the live stream is you, but they're not you. Never interact with them directly. If you see them in real life, leave immediately. They will try to replace you. The experiment ends when they say it ends, not before. The post ended with a single sentence. If you've already clicked the stream, it's too late. I sat there, my heart pounding, trying to process what I'd just read. It felt insane, like something out of a bad creepypasta, but none of this felt fake anymore. The stream, the text, the figure in the parking lot, it was all real. Too real. I decided I needed help. I wasn't sure who I could trust, but I had to tell someone. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That I found my neighbor on a live stream, tied to a chair, and now the internet was trying to kill me. They'd laugh me out of the station. Then I remembered my friend Matt. He's kind of a tech genius. One of those guys who builds his own computers and has like 6 different VPNs running at all times. If anyone could figure out what the hell was going on, it was him. I called him, half expecting the call not to go through, but it did, and after a couple of rings, he picked up. "Dude, it's midnight," he groaned. "What do you want?" "I need your help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's serious." 30 minutes later, I was parked outside Matt's apartment. He let me in, his face a mix of confusion and annoyance. "All right, what's the deal?" he asked, flopping onto his couch. I opened my laptop and showed him the stream. His expression changed immediately, his usual smirk replaced by something darker. "Where the hell did you find this?" he asked, his voice low. I told him everything about Olsen, the texts, the figure in the parking lot, the rules I'd found online. Matt listened, his face growing paler with every word. When I finished, he leaned back and ran a hand through his hair. "All right," he said. "First of all, you're an idiot for clicking that link. Second, this is bad." "No shit," I snapped. "Can you fix it or not?" He didn't answer. Instead, he started typing furiously on his keyboard, pulling up programs I didn't recognize. For a while, the only sound was the clacking of keys and the occasional muttered curse. And then, without warning, the stream popped up on his screen. It was different this time. The basement was gone. Now, the camera was in a room I didn't recognize. White walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and a single metal table in the center. On the table was a laptop, open and streaming. Me. The angle was from behind, but it was definitely me, sitting on Matt's couch, staring at the screen. I spun around, my eyes darting around the room, but there was no camera. No way anyone could be filming us. The chat exploded with comments. They're in the same room. Oh, this is gonna be good. Run, run, run. Matt slammed his laptop shut. We need to leave, he said, his voice shaking. Now. I didn't argue. We grabbed our stuff and bolted for the door. But just as we stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I really didn't. But I did anyway. Too late. The replacement is already here. We bolted down the stairs of Matt's apartment complex like our lives depended on it. And honestly, I was pretty sure they did. The fluorescent hallway lights flickered overhead as we sprinted, our footsteps echoing sharply. My chest was tight, my breaths shallow, but fear was the only thing keeping me moving. I didn't even know where we were running to, but I knew staying there wasn't an option. The message on my phone, "The replacement is already here," was on repeat in my head, a sinister chant that wouldn't stop. I couldn't get the image from the stream out of my mind either. Seeing myself, or whatever the hell that was, sitting in Matt's apartment, it felt like my brain was being peeled apart layer by layer. We finally burst out the main door into the cold night air. The parking lot was empty, eerily still, save for the faint hum of a street lamp buzzing overhead. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following us, but there was nothing. "I'm driving," Matt said, yanking the keys out of his pocket. I didn't argue. I was too busy scanning the shadows, my paranoia spiking with every second. He unlocked his car, and we jumped in, slamming the door shut like it would somehow keep us safe. As he started the engine, I couldn't help but glance at the rearview mirror. My stomach dropped. In the faint red glow of the brake lights, I saw something at the far edge of the lot. It was a figure, just barely visible in the shadows, standing perfectly still. They were tall and thin, their face obscured by the hood of a dark sweatshirt. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, but they were there, watching. "Go, go," I shouted, gripping the dashboard. Matt didn't need to be told twice. He floored it, tires screeching, as we tore out of the parking lot. I kept my eyes glued to the side mirror, and for a moment I thought we'd gotten away. But then the figure stepped into the light, and I saw its face. It was mine. I don't think I've ever screamed before, not really, not in the way people do in movies. But in that moment, I couldn't help it. It wasn't just that the figure looked like me, it was me. But there was something wrong. Its eyes were wide and hollow, almost like they were made of glass, reflecting the red taillights in an unnatural way. Its mouth was twisted into a smile that was too big, too sharp, like someone had stretched my face into a mask. "Don't look back," Matt shouted, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Just don't look." But I couldn't tear my eyes away. The thing didn't chase us. It just stood there, grinning, until the car turned a corner, and it was gone. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 15 minutes. Matt didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any answers. What could I even say? That there was a doppelganger of me standing in his parking lot? That we are being hunted by some kind of digital nightmare? None of it made sense, even in my own head. Eventually, we pulled into the parking lot of a Walmart. It was open 24 hours, and the bright fluorescent lights pouring out of the windows made it feel like some kind of sanctuary. Matt killed the engine and turned to me, his face pale and serious. "What the hell was that thing?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it's getting closer," he nodded, running a hand through his hair. "All right, we need to figure this out. If this is some kind of tech thing, maybe I can track it, figure out where it's coming from." I hesitated. "And if it's not a tech thing?" Matt didn't answer. He just grabbed his laptop from the back seat and got out of the car. I followed, sticking close to him as we walked into the store. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of employees stocking shelves and a few late-night shoppers wandering aimlessly. We found a table in the small McDonald's inside and set up camp. Matt started digging into the live stream, pulling up programs I couldn't even begin to understand. Lines of code and strings of numbers flashed across his screen as he muttered to himself, occasionally shaking his head or cursing under his breath. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the entrance, half expecting my doppelganger to stroll in at any moment. "Got something," Matt said suddenly, breaking the silence. His eyes were glued to the screen, his expression a mix of confusion and dread. "What is it?" I asked, leaning over to look. He pointed to a line of text in the code. It didn't mean anything to me, but Matt explained. This isn't just a live stream. It's like a virus, a self-replicating program that's somehow tied to your devices, and it's spreading. Spreading, I repeated, my throat dry. Matt nodded grimly. Every time someone clicks the stream, it pulls them in, like adding new players to a game. But here's the thing, it's not just pulling you in, it's pulling in your daughter, your face, I don't even know. It's like it's creating copies. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Copies? You mean like that thing we saw outside? Exactly, Matt said. And the more you interact with it, watching the stream, responding to the messages, the stronger it gets. It's like feeding it. So how do we stop it? I asked, desperate. Matt hesitated. I'm not sure we can, but I might be able to track where it's originating from, if I can find the source. He never finished his sentence. The lights in the Walmart flickered once, twice. Then they went out completely, plunging the entire store into darkness. For a moment, the only light came from Matt's laptop screen, casting eerie shadows across his face. What the hell? He started, but then we heard it. A low, droning hum, so deep it made the floor vibrate. It was coming from somewhere inside the store, growing louder by the second. And then, through the pitch-black silence, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Matt slammed his laptop shut and stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. We need to go. Now. But as we turned to leave, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking our path. It was me. No, not me. It. The thing smiled, that same, too wide smile, its glassy eyes gleaming in the dim light of the laptop. It tilted its head, almost like it was studying us. And then it spoke, in my voice. You can't run. You can't hide. The experiment is almost complete. And then it lunged. The thing lunged at us with a speed I didn't think was humanly possible. Matt barely had time to react. He grabbed a chair and threw it in its path, sending the thing stumbling back for a split second. That was all the time we needed. Run! Matt yelled, his voice shaking with panic. We bolted, weaving between tables and chairs, in the pitch-black Walmart McDonald's. The humming sound had grown louder, vibrating through the air like the store itself was alive and breathing. The emergency lights flickered weakly overhead, casting sporadic flashes of red that only made the shadows seem deeper. I could hear the thing's footsteps behind us. They weren't normal footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and echoed like something mechanical. My mind kept screaming at me that this wasn't possible, that this couldn't be happening, but the raw terror in my chest was real enough to drown out any rational thought. We made it into the aisles, sprinting past shelves stocked with cheap clothes and plastic bins. Matt was ahead of me, frantically searching for an exit. I glanced over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The thing was following us, but it wasn't running. It was walking, slow and steady, like it knew we couldn't escape. Its face, my face, was locked in that grotesque smile, the kind that made your stomach twist in knots. And its eyes, God, its eyes were glowing now, a faint, sickly white light that seemed to pierce through the darkness like a pair of headlights. "Matt!" I yelled. "Where's the exit?" He didn't answer. He just kept running, his laptop clutched tightly under one arm. I could hear him muttering something under his breath, like he was trying to piece together some kind of plan. Meanwhile, the footsteps behind us grew louder, faster. We turned a corner and found ourselves in the electronics section. Rows of TVs, laptops, and phones sat on display, their screens flickering with static. The humming was deafening now, and the air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Matt suddenly skidded to a stop. "There!" he shouted, pointing at an emergency exit door in the far corner. It was marked with a glowing red sign, the kind that screamed, "Do not open, alarm will sound." "We can't!" I yelled. "The alarm will—" "Do you want to die here?" Matt snapped, already running toward the door. I didn't have a choice. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. The thing was getting closer. I could feel it, the cold, metallic presence of it, bearing down on us like a predator. We hit the door at the same time, slamming into it with our full weight. The alarm blared, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the oppressive hum. But the door didn't budge. "Shh!" Matt yelled, slamming his shoulder against it again. "It's locked." I turned around, and that's when I saw it. The thing had stopped a few feet away, standing perfectly still, its glowing eyes fixed on us, unblinking. And then, to my horror, it started to change. Its face, the face that looked so much like mine, began to ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a stone. The features warped and twisted, melting into something else. Within seconds, it wasn't my face anymore. It was Matt's. "Oh my God," Matt whispered, stumbling back. "What the fuck is this?" The thing smiled wider, its teeth impossibly sharp now, gleaming like shards of glass. "You can't stop the experiment," it said, in Matt's voice this time. But it wasn't just his voice. It was distorted, layered, like a dozen versions of him were speaking all at once. "You're part of it now. Both of you." Before I could process what was happening, Matt grabbed my arm. "We need to go," he said, his voice trembling. "Now." We took off again, running deeper into the store. The thing didn't follow immediately, but I could hear its voice echoing through the aisles, mocking us. "You can't run forever. You can't hide. The experiment will find you." We ended up in the back storage area, a maze of towering shelves stacked with boxes. The air back here was stale, heavy with the scent of cardboard and cleaning chemicals. Matt pulled me behind a stack of pallets and crouched down, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "What the hell is this thing?" I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. Matt shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "It's not just some virus or live stream," he said. It's like it's alive, like it's feeding off us." "Feeding off us?" I repeated, my stomach churning. He nodded. "Every time we interact with it, watch the stream, respond to the messages, it's like we're giving it more power, more access. It's not just copying us, it's replacing us." "Replacing us?" My voice cracked. Matt grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at him. "We have to destroy it," he said. "If we don't, it's going to kill us. Or worse, it's going to become us." Before I could respond, the humming returned, louder than ever. The lights overhead flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that made the storage area look like something out of a nightmare. I peeked around the pallets and froze. The thing was there, walking slowly down the aisle, its glowing eyes scanning the rows of shelves. It wasn't smiling anymore. Its expression was blank, almost bored, like it already knew how this was going to end. I turned back to Matt. "How do we destroy it?" He hesitated, then opened his laptop. I think if I can overload its code, corrupt the data, it might shut down. But I need time." "How much time?" "More than we have." The thing's footsteps were getting closer. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. I grabbed a metal pipe that was leaning against the wall, my hands trembling. "I'll distract it," I said. "What? Are you insane?" Matt hissed. "Just do it," I said. "If this thing replaces me, make sure it doesn't replace you, too." I didn't give him a chance to argue. I stepped out from behind the pallets, the pipe gripped tightly in my hands. The thing stopped, its glowing eyes locking onto me instantly. For a moment, neither of us moved, and then it smiled. It was the last thing I saw before it lunged. The fight was a blur. I swung the pipe wildly, the sound of metal hitting flesh, or whatever the hell it was made of, echoing through the storage area. It was fast, impossibly fast, dodging most of my attacks and striking back with inhuman precision. Its hands were cold, like steel, and every time it touched me, it felt like my skin was burning. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Behind me, I could hear Matt typing furiously, muttering to himself as he worked. Come on, he kept saying, his voice tight with panic. "Just a little more." The thing grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing. Its glowing eyes bored into mine, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But then its face began to ripple again. It was changing. This time, it wasn't me or Matt. It was Olsen. The distraction was enough. I swung the pipe one last time, hitting it square in the head. It dropped me, staggering back as its body began to glitch, flickering like a broken TV. I scrambled away, gasping for air. "Now!" Matt screamed. I didn't know what he'd done, but the thing suddenly let out an ear-piercing scream, its body convulsing violently. The lights overhead exploded, showering us in sparks, and the humming reached a deafening crescendo before cutting out completely. When I opened my eyes, the thing was gone. Matt and I didn't say much as we left the Walmart. He destroyed his laptop before we even got to the car, smashing it to pieces with the metal pipe. "Just in case," he muttered. We drove in silence, the events of the night hanging over us like a storm cloud. I don't know where we're going, and honestly, I don't think it matters. The experiment might be over, but something tells me this isn't the end, because as we drove, my phone buzzed one last time. Congratulations, viewer number 42. You've completed phase 1. Stay tuned for phase 2. And that's when I realized we didn't destroy it. We only made it stronger. I found a dark web ritual that promised to expose liars. My neighbor's face changed while I was reading the instructions. So, let me start by saying that I'm not someone who messes around with the deep web. You hear all those horror stories about people stumbling into chat rooms they shouldn't, finding hitmen for hire websites, or accidentally downloading viruses that take over your webcam. Yeah, no thanks. I'm not that stupid. Or, well, I wasn't. I've been obsessed with calling people out on their lies ever since I found out my ex cheated on me. Let's call him Jake. Jake wasn't just your run-of-the-mill liar. He was one of those guys who could lie so effortlessly you'd start questioning your own memory. I swear I saw you talking to her. No, babe, you're imagining things. Yeah, right. After Jake, I became a walking lie detector. Whenever someone started to BS me, I couldn't let it go. It got so bad that one of my friends jokingly said, "You should just buy one of those truth potions from the dark web or something." That's how the idea got planted in my head. One boring Friday night, I was doom scrolling through TikTok when my roommate Zoe came in with Starbucks. She put her iced caramel macchiato down, sighed, and asked what I was doing. When I told her I was just bored, she laughed and said, "Well, why don't you actually do something weird for once? You're always so safe." She left after that, but her words kinda lingered. And by the time midnight rolled around, I found myself Googling how to access the dark web. Dumb, right? I know. It wasn't as hard as I thought. There were step-by-step YouTube tutorials, yes, actual tutorials, that explained how to download a Tor browser, set up a VPN, and access the Onion sites. Before I knew it, I was scrolling through sketchy-looking marketplaces, weird forums, and honestly, some surprisingly tame pages selling stuff like vintage coins. But then, I found something called the Truth Ritual. It wasn't a flashy page. There was no creepy video playing or ominous music, just plain black text on a white screen that said, "Tired of lies? Want to expose the hidden truths around you?" The Truth Ritual is guaranteed to show the true face of liars. Warning, perform at your own risk. Underneath was a button that said, "Download instructions." My finger hovered over it for way longer than I'd like to admit. Something about the simplicity of the page gave me chills, like it was too plain to be fake. No elaborate setup, just straight to the point. And let's be real, curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the button. The file downloaded instantly. It was a PDF called truthjugritual.pdf, and when I opened it, the first thing I noticed was that it didn't look like some random prank. The instructions were detailed, specific, and honestly, kind of unnerving. It wasn't just some light a candle and chant nonsense kind of thing. No, this was the real deal. Here's the gist of it. You needed a photograph of the person whose truth you wanted to expose. A mirror. Any mirror, as long as it was clean and free of cracks. A sharp object, specifically a knife. No scissors, no razors. It had to be a knife. Lastly, a small bowl of salt water. The instructions said to place the photograph in front of the mirror, light a candle, and stare into the reflection while reciting a specific phrase 3 times. Apparently, the ritual wouldn't just reveal the liar's secrets, it would force them to show their true face. The PDF didn't explain what that meant, but the phrasing was weirdly unsettling. The last line stuck with me. The truth cannot be unseen. Once revealed, it will demand an answer. I don't know what possessed me to actually do it. Maybe I wanted closure from all the lies I'd been told, or maybe I just wanted to see if it worked. Either way, I figured, what's the harm? It's not like magic is real, right? I decided to test it out on someone harmless, my neighbor, Mr. Carson. He's this sweet, retired guy who lives across the hall from me, always baking cookies, always saying hi. But the thing is, there's something off about him. I couldn't put my finger on it, but every now and then, he'd say stuff that didn't add up, like how he used to be in the military, but he couldn't remember what branch he served in, or how he claimed he didn't have any kids. But I swear, I've heard a child's voice coming from his apartment late at night. Anyway, I had a photo of him from our apartment's Christmas party. Perfect test subject, right? I set everything up in my room around 2 a.m. A candle, a mirror, a bowl of salt water, and the picture of Mr. Carson propped up in front of the glass. I turned off all the lights, shut the door, and started the ritual. The chant was strange. It wasn't in English. The words felt thick and heavy in my mouth, like I was saying something I wasn't supposed to. The air in the room got noticeably colder, and I swear the candlelight dimmed, even though there wasn't a draft. By the third repetition, I felt this weird pressure in my chest, like someone was watching me. Then it happened. The photo didn't change. Mr. Carson's face stayed the same in the picture. But in the mirror, oh God, in the mirror, his reflection was wrong. His smile stretched too wide, his eyes bulged out like they were about to pop, and his skin started to crack, like old paint peeling off a wall. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring, as his face twisted into something I can only describe as not human. And then his reflection turned to look at me. I screamed, knocking the candle over and plunging the room into darkness. When I finally found the light switch, the mirror was just a mirror again. The photo was untouched, and everything looked normal. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined the whole thing, but then I heard it, a knock at my door. It wasn't frantic or loud, just calm, rhythmic, 3 slow knocks. I froze, heart pounding, because I knew it was him. No one else in the building knocks like that, but when I checked the peephole, there was no one there. I thought that was the end of it, but the next morning, things got worse. Mr. Carson was standing in the hallway, smiling like he always does. But when I said good morning, he didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes, they weren't friendly anymore. They were black. Not like dark brown black, but full-on, inky black. And as I walked past him, I swear I heard him whisper, "The truth is waiting." I haven't been able to sleep since. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face in the mirror, twisting and cracking. And the worst part? I don't think he's human anymore. Or maybe he never was. I'm scared to go back into my apartment tonight. What if I made a mistake? What if the ritual didn't just expose the truth about him, but also invited something in? I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I couldn't. The way Mr. Carson looked at me in the hallway, like he knew something, made my skin crawl. So, I grabbed my laptop and a bag with some essentials, told my roommate I needed to get out for a bit, and headed to a 24-hour McDonald's a few blocks away. Don't ask me why I thought Mickey D's was the safest option. I think it was the fluorescent lights. They felt like they could keep whatever darkness I'd let in at bay. I sat in a corner booth, nursing a cold Sprite and scrolling through my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A part of me thought maybe I was losing it. I mean, the whole ritual thing, the mirror, the reflection, none of it made sense. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, I couldn't shake the memory of Mr. Carson's eyes, those empty black voids. I started Googling everything I could about mirror rituals, truth spells, and yes, even dark web curses. Most of it was the usual New Age nonsense. Cleanse your space with sage, or visualize positive energy. But then I found a thread on some random forum called The Blind Rooms. It looked like one of those barely active boards where people post conspiracy theories, but this thread caught my attention immediately. The title read, "Did you see their real face?" The OP had written a long post about doing a ritual that sounded eerily similar to the one I'd done. He described the same setup, the mirror, the photo, the chant, and claimed it had revealed his co-worker's true face. But here's where things got really creepy. According to the post, once the ritual is complete, the liar becomes aware that you know their secret. And worse, they'll try to silence you. One comment stood out to me. It said, "They're not liars, they're pretenders, and once they know you've seen through them, they'll do anything to keep the truth hidden. Whatever you do, don't let them in." That line hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't told anyone about what happened, but what if Mr. Carson knew I'd done the ritual? What if he was waiting for me to slip up, to let my guard down? The thought sent shivers down my spine. I stayed at that McDonald's until sunrise. Around 5 a.m., I started to feel like maybe I was safe. Maybe I'd overreacted. The whole thing could have just been a stress-induced hallucination, right? I decided to head back to my apartment to grab more clothes and maybe get some sleep. But when I got to my building, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The door to Mr. Carson's apartment was wide open. Now, let me explain. Mr. Carson was one of those people who always kept his door locked. He had a whole routine about it too. Every time he left his apartment, he'd double-check the lock, jiggle the handle, and sometimes even give it a little kick to make sure it was secure. So, to see his door just hanging open like that, it felt wrong. I don't know why I went inside. Curiosity? Stupidity? Maybe both. But something about the open door was calling me, like it wanted me to step through. The air inside his apartment was stale, like the place hadn't been ventilated in years. And the smell, it was this sickly sweet odor that reminded me of rotting fruit, or meat. The living room was exactly what you'd expect from an old guy. A worn-out recliner, stacks of old newspapers, and one of those bulky TVs from the early 2000s. But there was something out of place. On the coffee table, surrounded by half-empty cups of tea and cookie crumbs, was a black leather notebook. It didn't have a title or any markings on it, but when I picked it up, I immediately felt this weird, heavy sensation in my chest, like the notebook didn't want to be touched. My hands were shaking as I opened it to the first page, and that's when I realized this wasn't just some diary or planner. The pages were filled with names. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all written in this sharp, almost angry handwriting. Next to each name was a series of dates, and below that, a word or phrase scrawled in red ink. Some of the phrases were normal, like liar or thief, but others were disturbing. Words like pretender, faceless, and not human. A few names even had the word removed, written underneath in bold red letters, and then I found my name. It was near the middle of the book, sandwiched between two strangers I didn't recognize. Next to my name was yesterday's date, the day I performed the ritual. Below that, in jagged red letters, it said, "Saw too much." I slammed the book shut, my pulse racing. That's when I noticed the sound. It was faint at first, like a low hum, but it was coming from the hallway. I stepped out of Mr. Carson's apartment and immediately froze. Someone, or something, was standing at the end of the hall. It was Mr. Carson, or at least, it looked like him. But his body was wrong. His arms hung unnaturally long at his sides, and his head tilted at an angle that no human neck should be able to manage. He was grinning, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was predatory, like he'd caught me in a trap. "You shouldn't have come in," he said, his voice distorted like it was coming through a broken speaker. I didn't wait to hear what he'd say next. I ran. I don't even remember how I made it down the stairs and out of the building, but the next thing I knew, I was sprinting down the street, clutching the black notebook, like my life depended on it. I didn't stop until I was at the train station, surrounded by the buzz of early commuters. For a moment, I felt safe, like he couldn't follow me here. But then I opened the notebook again. The last page had changed. In place of the usual names and notes, there was a single sentence written in blood-red ink. "The truth cannot hide. It's coming for you." And below that, a sketch of my face. After I saw that sketch of my face in the notebook, something in me snapped. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was this bone-deep realization that whatever I'd gotten myself into wasn't something I could just walk away from. Mr. Carson, or the thing that used to be Mr. Carson, knew what I'd done. And now, it wasn't just watching me. It was coming for me. I spent the next few hours bouncing from place to place. Starbucks, the library, a random park bench, anywhere public, anywhere with people. I felt like a hunted animal trying to blend into the herd. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him, or it, lurking in the shadows. But no matter how paranoid I felt, he never showed up. Not in person, at least. That's when the phone call started. I was at a Target, wandering the aisles aimlessly and trying to act like everything was fine. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't even think twice about answering it. I didn't recognize the number, but it had a local area code, so I figured it might have been Zoe or someone else from my building. But when I put the phone to my ear, there was nothing but silence. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. The silence stretched on for so long that I was about to hang up, but then I heard it. A faint, raspy breathing, like someone was holding the phone right up to their mouth. My stomach turned to ice. "Who is this?" I whispered. The breathing stopped, and then, in a voice that sounded like gravel being dragged across metal, it said, "You let me in." I dropped the phone, right there in the middle of the detergent aisle. I let it fall to the floor like it had burned me. A couple of shoppers gave me weird looks, but I didn't care. I picked up the phone, stuffed it in my pocket, and practically sprinted out of the store. I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the kind of place you'd stay unless you had no other options, which, at that point, I didn't. The guy at the front desk didn't even ask for ID, just took my cash and handed me a key to a room that smelled like mildew and despair, but it had a lock on the door, and that was all I cared about. I barricaded myself inside with the chair from the desk, checked the windows twice, and finally let myself collapse onto the bed. My heart was still racing, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted version of Mr. Carson grinning at me from the hallway. The notebook was sitting on the nightstand, and even though I wanted to throw it out the window, something told me that wouldn't help. It felt like it was tied to me now, like a chain I couldn't break. I don't know how long I sat there staring at it, but eventually, exhaustion got the better of me. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember was waking up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was coming from the room next door. The walls were thin, and I could hear the muffled sound of a TV playing late-night infomercials. But as I sat up, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, I realized the whispers were inside my room. They were faint, like a dozen voices speaking just below the threshold of understanding. I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded angry, accusatory. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and scanned the room. Nothing. The whispers faded, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined them. But then I noticed the notebook. It was open. I hadn't touched it since leaving Mr. Carson's apartment, but now it was lying on the floor, its pages spread wide, like it had been thrown there. My hands were trembling as I picked it up, and when I saw what was written on the open page, my blood ran cold. There was a new entry in the same jagged red handwriting. "You're not safe. None of you are." Below it were two more sketches. One was of Zoe, my roommate, sitting on the couch in our apartment. The other was of me, lying in the motel bed, clutching the notebook. The details were horrifyingly accurate, down to the crumpled blanket on my bed and the Starbucks cup Zoe had left on the coffee table in our living room. My throat tightened as I realized the implications. Whoever or whatever was behind this, they weren't just watching me. They were watching everyone around me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those whispers again, growing louder, angrier. By the time the sun came up, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't just sit there, waiting for this thing to come for me. I had to figure out what it wanted. I decided to start with the notebook. Most of the entries didn't make any sense, just random names, dates, and cryptic notes about lies and secrets. But as I flipped through the pages, I started to notice a pattern. Every once in a while, there'd be an entry with the word removed, underlined in bold red letters, and every single one of those names was followed by a date that was unnervingly close to the present. I did a quick search on my phone for a few of the names, and my stomach dropped when I saw the results. They were missing persons cases, people from all over the country who'd vanished without a trace. Their last known locations were different, but they all had one thing in common. They disappeared within days of their names being written in the notebook. That's when it hit me. The ritual didn't just reveal the truth. It marked people, me included. The whispers came back that night, louder this time. I tried to drown them out with the TV, but no matter how high I turned up the volume, I could still hear them underneath. It was like they were inside my head. And then, just as suddenly as they started, they stopped. I didn't have time to feel relieved, though, because that's when I heard the knocking. It was soft at first, gentle, like someone tapping their fingers against the motel room door. But then it got louder, more insistent. By the third knock, it sounded like someone was trying to break the door down. I grabbed the chair I'd used to barricade the door and pressed it against my chest like a shield. "Who is it?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No response. The knocking stopped, and for a moment The silence was worse than the noise. But then, from the other side of the door, I heard a voice, deep, distorted, and all too familiar. "You let me in," it said. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed the notebook, threw open the window, and climbed out into the freezing night. I could still hear the voice calling after me as I ran, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. Now I'm writing this from the corner of a 24-hour diner, surrounded by strangers who have no idea what's happening. The notebook is sitting on the table in front of me, and I can't bring myself to open it again. But I know it's not over. The whispers are still there, faint but persistent, like a radio tuned to the wrong frequency. And the worst part, when I looked around the diner earlier, I swear I saw someone sitting in the corner booth, staring at me. He looked like Mr. Carson, but his smile was too wide, and his eyes were as black as the night outside. I think he's waiting for me to slip up, to let my guard down. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. I spent the next 2 days in a spiral of paranoia. I didn't go back to my apartment. I didn't check in with Zoe. I couldn't. Every time I thought about calling her, I imagined the thing, Mr. Carson's face, standing outside her door, waiting, watching, and the thought of leading it to her made me sick. Instead, I moved like a ghost through the city. I slept in public places, train stations, crowded coffee shops, even a Walmart that stayed open all night. Somewhere deep down, I thought that maybe if I stayed surrounded by people, the thing wouldn't risk coming after me. But even in a crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow felt like it was creeping closer. Every face looked wrong, like their smiles lingered a second too long, or their eyes followed me, even after I'd passed by. By the third day, I was a wreck. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't slept, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The whispers were back, louder and angrier, filling my head with static every time I closed my eyes. I couldn't tell what they were saying, but it felt like they were accusing me of something, blaming me for opening that stupid file in the first place. And maybe they were right. That morning, I found myself back at the diner, the same one I'd run to after the motel. It was almost comforting in a weird way. Bright lights, bad coffee, the low hum of a jukebox playing oldies. I picked the booth farthest from the door, facing the window so I could watch the street. I was still clutching the notebook, but I hadn't opened it since the night at the motel. Just touching it felt wrong, like it was alive somehow, feeding off my fear. I told myself I was just there to think, to come up with a plan. But the truth was, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Part of me thought about going to the police, but what would I even tell them? That my retired neighbor had turned into some kind of demon and was stalking me through the city. They'd lock me up for sure. And then there was the other part of me, the part that was starting to wonder if maybe this was all in my head. Maybe I'd finally cracked under the stress, and the thing with Mr. Carson's face was just some twisted hallucination. That delusion lasted about 5 minutes. I was stirring sugar into my coffee when I noticed the man sitting at the counter. At first, I didn't think much of him. Just some guy in a gray hoodie, hunched over a plate of eggs. But then he turned his head slightly, and I saw his reflection in the chrome napkin holder. His face didn't match. In the mirror, his skin was pale and cracked, like old plaster, and his mouth was twisted into that too wide smile I'd seen in the mirror during the ritual. But the worst part was his eyes. They weren't just black. They were empty, like someone had scooped them out and left gaping holes in their place. I froze, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. My brain screamed at me to get up, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the man who wasn't a man, waiting for him to notice me. And then he did. He didn't turn his head or move his body. His reflection just shifted. The knot eyes in the napkin holder locked onto mine, and his smile widened, cracking the corners of his mouth like dry paper. Slowly, deliberately, he raised one hand and waved at me. Just a small, casual wave, like we were old friends running into each other on the street. That broke the spell. I bolted out of the booth, knocking over my coffee cup in the process, and ran out of the diner without looking back. I could feel him watching me the whole way, but when I finally glanced over my shoulder, the street behind me was empty. No man, no reflection, nothing. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the city, where the skyscrapers gave way to warehouses and abandoned lots. It was eerily quiet out there, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. I ducked into an alley and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My chest felt like it was on fire, and my head was spinning, but at least I was alone. Or so I thought. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I noticed the shadows at the end of the alley were moving. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but then I heard the sound. Soft, wet footsteps, like someone walking barefoot through mud. My stomach dropped. I clutched the notebook tighter and started backing away. But before I could move more than a few steps, something stepped out of the shadows. It was him, Mr. Carson, or whatever was wearing his face. But this time, he wasn't even trying to look human. His skin hung off his bones like melted wax, and his arms were too long, dragging along the ground as he moved. His head tilted to one side, his neck making a horrible cracking sound. And when he opened his mouth, it wasn't a smile anymore. It was a void, endless and black, filled with the sound of those whispers that had been haunting me. "You shouldn't have run," he said, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You can't escape the truth." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a pile of garbage, and held up the notebook like it was some kind of shield. "What do you want from me?" I screamed. "Why won't you leave me alone?" He tilted his head the other way, his void mouth twitching like he was amused. "You called me," he said. "You let me in." I don't know what came over me, but in that moment I snapped. Maybe it was the fear, or the exhaustion, or just the sheer wrongness of everything that had happened, but I opened the notebook and tore out the page with my name on it. Holding it up, I screamed, "Is this what you want? Take it and leave me alone." For a split second, he hesitated. His two long arms stopped dragging, and his body seemed to ripple, like a reflection in water. Then he lunged. The next few minutes are a blur. I remember running, the sound of his footsteps pounding behind me, the whispers growing louder and louder until they were all I could hear. I remember turning a corner and seeing a fire escape, climbing it so fast I nearly slipped. And I remember looking down and seeing him standing in the alley, staring up at me with that impossible grin. "You can't hide forever," he called, his voice echoing in my head, even though I was halfway up the fire escape. "The truth always finds you." When I finally reached the roof, I collapsed, my chest heaving, my vision swimming. The whispers were still there, but they were quieter now, like they were waiting for something. I pulled the notebook out of my jacket and stared at it, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. As long as I had this thing, I'd never be safe. So I did the only thing I could think of. I lit it on fire. The flames took hold faster than I expected, spreading across the pages like they'd been soaked in gasoline. The whispers turned into screams, high-pitched and furious, and for a moment, I thought I'd made a horrible mistake. But then the notebook crumbled to ash, and the scream stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I don't know if it's over. I haven't seen him, or it, since that night, but I still feel like I'm being watched. Every time I look in the mirror, I half expect to see a face that isn't mine staring back. And sometimes, when it's quiet, I hear a voice whispering, "The truth cannot hide." I thought burning the notebook would end it. For a few hours, it even felt like it had. The whispers were gone. The world was silent in a way that was almost too quiet, like the calm after a storm. But deep down, I think I always knew it wasn't over. You can't just burn something like that and expect it to disappear. The truth doesn't work that way. I stayed on that rooftop until the sun came up, my body aching, my clothes reeking of smoke. For the first time in days, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I was free. But as I climbed back down the fire escape and stepped out onto the street, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Every single person I passed stared at me. At first, I thought I was just imagining it, but as I walked, their eyes followed me. Some of them stopped in their tracks, their heads turning unnaturally to watch me go by. A man in a business suit stood frozen on the corner, his coffee spilling onto the sidewalk as his mouth slowly twisted into a grin that was just a little too wide. A woman pushing a stroller whispered something under her breath, her words soft but sharp, like glass scraping against metal. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself I was just paranoid, but the farther I went, the worse it got. Their faces began to change. Their skin cracked and peeled like old paint. Their eyes turned black, bottomless, and their smiles, those horrible, endless smiles, were everywhere. By the time I reached the end of the block, I was running again, my breath coming in ragged gasps. They weren't people anymore. They were things, and they were all staring at me. I ended up in the subway, deep underground, where the air was damp and the flickering lights cast long, twitching shadows. The platform was nearly empty, just a few people scattered around, waiting for the next train. For once, no one was looking at me. No one was smiling. I collapsed onto a bench, my hands shaking, my heart still racing from whatever the hell had just happened. That's when I heard it, the low, rhythmic sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was just another commuter, but the sound didn't stop. It didn't get closer, didn't fade away. It just lingered, echoing off the walls like it was coming from everywhere at once. I stood up, scanning the platform, but there was no one there. Just me and the flickering lights and the faint, metallic hum of the train tracks. And then the whispers started again. They were louder now, more distinct. I could almost make out words, but they were layered on top of each other, a cacophony of voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The sound was coming from the tunnel, from the darkness where the train should have been. I stared into that black void, and for a moment, I thought I saw something staring back. 2 pinpricks of light. Eyes, watching me. The train roared into the station, its headlights cutting through the dark, and the whispers stopped. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and stepped onto the train, hoping, praying that it would take me somewhere, anywhere away from this nightmare. But the train was empty. I don't mean there weren't a lot of people on it, empty. I mean completely, unnaturally empty. No conductor, no passengers, not even the usual litter of newspapers and coffee cups scattered across the seats. The doors closed behind me with a hiss, and the train lurched forward, its lights flickering as it plunged back into the tunnel. I sat down, clutching the metal pole for balance, and tried to steady my breathing. The car was silent, except for the hum of the train on the tracks. But after a few minutes, I realized I wasn't alone. There was a man sitting at the far end of the car. I hadn't noticed him when I got on, but there he was, hunched over in the corner, his face hidden by the shadow of his hood. He wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound, but something about him felt wrong. His body was too still, like he was holding his breath, waiting. "Hey," I called out, my voice shaky. "You okay?" He didn't respond. Slowly, I stood up, gripping the pole tighter as I made my way toward him. The train rattled and swayed, the lights flickering above me, but the man didn't move. As I got closer, I noticed something strange about his hands. They were resting on his knees, pale and thin, but his fingers were too long. Each one ended in a sharp, blackened nail that looked more like a claw than a human hand. "Sir," I whispered, taking a cautious step back. "Are you—" He looked up. It wasn't a face. It was a void, a swirling mass of darkness where his features should have been. And yet, somehow, I knew he was smiling. I could feel it, like a knife pressing against my skin. "You can't escape the truth," he said, his voice echoing in my head. "No matter how far you run." I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and fell onto the floor. The lights above me flickered violently, and for a moment, the entire train was plunged into darkness. When they came back on, the man was gone. But I wasn't alone. The car was filled with them, shadowy figures with cracked skin and blackened eyes, their two wide smiles stretching across their faces like wounds. They were packed shoulder to shoulder, standing silently, staring at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. And then, in perfect unison, they whispered, "The truth cannot die." The lights flickered again, and they moved. Not like people, but like a single entity, their bodies jerking and twisting as they closed in on me. I scrambled to my feet, my hands slipping on the cold metal floor, and ran to the next car. The door slammed shut behind me, but it didn't matter. They were already there, waiting. Every car was the same, empty at first, then filled with those things as soon as I stepped inside. Their whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they weren't whispers anymore. They were screams, raw and guttural, filling my ears and my head until I thought my skull would split open. I don't know how many cars I ran through, how many doors I slammed shut behind me, but eventually I hit a dead end. The last car. There was nowhere left to run. The things were closing in, their smiles glowing in the flickering light, their claws scraping against the walls and floor as they reached for me. And then I saw him, Mr. Carson, standing at the far end of the car, his body twisted and broken, his head tilted at that impossible angle. His smile was wider than ever, splitting his face in two, and his empty black eyes bore into mine as he whispered, "The truth is here." I don't remember much after that, just darkness, pain, and the sound of my own screams blending with theirs, echoing through the endless tunnels. They found me 3 days later, wandering the subway tracks with no memory of how I got there. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, but I don't feel lucky. I feel hollow, like a part of me was left behind in that darkness.